The Deep End team acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we work and live, pays respect to elders past, present and future, and recognises the importance of Indigenous knowledge to informing public debate. Our guest today on The Deep End is Allegra Spender. Allegra Spender is the sitting member for Wentworth in the Australian House of Representatives. She was elected to this previously Liberal seat in Sydney in 2022 after campaigning as an independent on a platform of climate action, political integrity and gender equality. She holds an economics degree from Cambridge University and a Master of Science from the University of London. She has worked as a business analyst at McKinsey, a policy analyst for UK Treasury, and managing director of her family's fashion label, Carla Zampatti. She has also been chair of the Sydney Renewable Power Company and CEO of the Australian Business and Community Network, which partners schools with leading Australian businesses to address educational disadvantage. Since joining Parliament, she has taken a leading role in legislating a target for reducing Australia's CO2 emissions and establishing the National Anti-Corruption Commission. She presently serves as co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and convenes the Wentworth for the Voice network of individuals, businesses, community groups and councils.
So we're here in the Ian Potter Centre in the Melbourne Conservatorium on our South Bank campus. Patrick's the producer, Aaron Corn and I are the anchors for the podcast, and we're absolutely delighted to be speaking to you today, Allegra. I'll ask the first question. Allegra, you are an independent politician and you've become quite a supporter of the referendum question, the referendum proposal for Indigenous constitutional recognition by establishing the Voice. What led you to take this position?
It really started with the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and I actually have a copy of it right behind me on my wall. And, I read that Uluru Statement, and it was one of the most beautiful pieces of writing I've ever read, and certainly I think from an Australian point of view, probably the most beautiful piece of Australian writing. And it inspired me in terms of the sort of generosity of the offer from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to the broader community about truly moving to a new future for the country, a future where all of our brothers and sisters walk together and have equal opportunities and equal contributions to make into the country. And so it was very much the inspiration for me from the start. And then the other side of it was more the practical part, because I'm someone who's worked, in a lot of different places. I've worked in not-for-profits, I've worked overseas. And what I've learned from my life is that if you want to make a difference, you better start by asking people who, are going to be affected by the difference you're trying to make about what's important to them and what practically they think will make a change. Because, I've learned time and time again, in working in a hospital in the UK, trying to impose things on other people fails. Listening to people, understanding what's important to people and working with people succeeds. And I think the Voice is fundamentally that. It's about an opportunity for us to make a practical difference in a way that is constitutionally safe, but deep down a practical difference to the lives of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people by simply listening and engaging. And I think that for me is the heart of it.
Yes, and I think that's the point of it too. So tell us a bit about your life and give us an example of where you learnt that listening to people is vital to finding solutions.
Yeah, sure. So I worked in a big hospital in the UK, actually, in a big public hospital. And what we were trying to do was actually make the lives of patients better. So, how do you get better outcomes, both medical, but also emotional outcomes for patients, and also the lives of, the people who worked in the hospital better. And so we did a lot of listening. And it was really interesting. When you talk to patients, doctors always had a view on what patients need and want. When you talk to patients about what's important to them, they, obviously medical care is really critical to them, but actually some of the other pieces about, when can their families visit them, about knowing what's going to happen to them, about, all these different parts of their life that makes their stay in hospital less frightening, better for them, but also which leads to better health outcomes, were different to what other people assumed they would be. And at the same time, talking to, the nurses, the doctors, the allied health workers, we were looking at a lot of things of like, how can you make the hospital work better? And I was part of the hospital management. And the problem is hospital management has spent, decades telling doctors, nurses, allied health workers what will make their lives better, what will make the hospital run better. And they are extremely cynical about that because they feel like they're constantly being told what to do. But people who are telling them don't really understand what is happening on the ground. And so from their point of view, starting with the saying, okay, look, we all share this goal, which is, get better outcomes for patients and make it a better environment for staff. Tell us what you think will make the difference. That was just so much more effective than decades of management telling everybody what they thought was the right answer. And for me, that's the fundamental part, is start by listening from the people who are most affected by the issues that you're trying to affect, and listen and learn and work with them to come up with solutions that they believe will make a difference.
And I think that's the principle of all human rights, really, isn't it? Human rights have to be substantiated. They have to be able to be implemented in people's lives and useful in people's lives in order for them to be real. And I think that's what's missing from the Australian politic. We talk about the rights of people, but do they in fact have these rights? Which leads me to ask you, Allegra, what led you to become a politician?
And look, I didn't expect to be. And if you'd asked me 2.5 years ago, was I going to be sitting here doing this? It was not even on my radar at all. But I was approached by my community to say whether I would run for Parliament, particularly around, I think, three things: around climate action, around a better representation of some more inclusive society, and frankly, a kinder society. That's a word that my community used a lot, was of kind. And then also about, politics and politicians who are standing up for the people they are representing, not for their own interests or the interests of their parties. Because my community was very cynical, I think, of where politics had gotten to, and felt fundamentally that we were not on the right track and we didn't have the right leaders behaving the right way to get us on the right track. And so I stood because I ultimately decided that, I would say to people, like, if it's worth fighting for, then you have to get up and do it. Like, some things are worth the fight, and this was worth the fight. And I thought that, I was so frustrated, like so many of my community, and I just felt this was the time that shouting at the TV, being frustrated wasn't enough. I believed we could get an independent up. And, I said, look, if the community thought I was the best crazy person who was willing to do it, then I would do it. And that's why I stood.
So 2 questions. Are you making a difference as a politician? And what's the feeling in your community about the referendum?
I think, firstly, let me start with the second one and I'll come back to the first one. I was out this morning in Bondi Junction, which is one of the big transport hubs in the community. And I think it was actually pretty positive. We've also door knocked over 12,000 doors in my electorate. And I think there's actually a lot of support out there. And there are still a lot of people who don't know or are still starting to think it through. And so I know it's going to be a tough fight, but I believe that we will only know on the day how this is going to go. Because I still meet people who go, when I ask them about The Voice, they say, you're talking about the television show. Those people are still around, even in my electorate. So, there are a lot of people who haven't started to engage, and a lot of people who have really thoughtful questions and really want to engage. We did an event last week with the sort of conservative voices for Yes. So we had Julian Leeser, Tony Nutt, Jeffrey Winter, all Liberals for Yes, talking to my community who may more identify with the Liberal Party values, but are also seriously considering this. And, that was an incredibly useful and constructive discussion. So I think the most important thing right now is to have the conversation, and have the conversation broadly with the community, open ears, address, I think, a lot of fundamental misunderstandings and misrepresentations. That's how I believe we can get this done. And that's what we're trying to do, starting in the community. And, I just would say the last point, just on my community's feeling, people in my community want Australia to work for everybody. And I think feel a real sense that in many ways, this country doesn't work for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and they want to change that. And I think then they're trying to work out, well, is this the right move? And that's my job, and that's the job of other volunteers out there, is to help them understand how important that is. In terms of are we making a difference? Yeah, I feel very much actually as a member of the House of Reps that I've made a really significant difference, and also to the community. And I think part of it is in different ways. One way is raising the issues and speaking up on the issues that, frankly, the major parties don't want to talk about. You see that I've spent a lot of time talking about tax because it's an extremely scary topic, and it's so politicized. The wedging is so virulent that no major party can talk about tax in a way without expecting very much that they're going to be completely wedged by the other side. But we do need to have conversations about tax because they fundamentally affect the productivity and growth of our economy, and frankly the fairness and equity in our economy as well. And so, that's what you can do as an independent is speak up on those issues. And I can't tell you how many letters and emails I've had from people saying, oh, thank you for talking about a really important topic that basically no one's getting any conversation on. You see that similarly in things like gambling reform that other members on the crossbench have been pursuing for many years. And finally, the major parties are starting to recognise that people don't like the constant advertising of sports bets and other gambling on when they watch sport. But frankly, the major parties could sit around and, have effectively a gentleman's agreement that no one's going to touch it because the gambling industry is a very powerful lobby group and no one wanted to pick a fight. And I think that's where independents standing up and going, what, we don't care about the vested interests. We're willing to listen to our community and stand up because we know that the community has a very strong view on gambling advertising, even if politicians to date have been too weak to stand up on those sorts of issues. And similarly, last example I'll use is refugees. So my community is very, very supportive of refugees in this country and frankly appalled by the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers. And one of the best moments I've had to date is meeting a man, Saeed Amasi, who was detained for 13 years in our immigration centre, the longest detainee. I had actually FaceTimed him when he was in Villawood. One of my constituents had gone to see him, had developed this great relationship with him and brought his case to me to help advocate for. And I advocated for that with the minister and others did as well. And then I got to meet him when he was released. And that's probably, I don't think I'll ever forget that moment because, he's a man, he's been locked up for 13 years, but frankly, he's grateful to be in Australia and wants to build his life here and is incredibly inspiring. So they're the big issues, and sometimes it's actually just the person-to-person thing that makes all the difference.
It's extraordinary when you put it like that we've done that to people.
It is.
Just hearing you say that, because of course we're so inured to it from news, constant media cycle. But when you put it like that, that's a devastating thing to actually have to face, isn't it?
Yeah. When coming back to the voice, the piece that I think, when I read the Uluru Statement from the Heart, when I read that, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the most incarcerated people on earth. Like, how can we as a country sit by and go, you know what, we'll just keep on working away on that? When it is said in the House that an Aboriginal young man is more likely to go to jail than to go to university, we cannot just let this pass. Hope is not a strategy. We actually need to take action on this. And I believe that you take action by starting with listening.
Look, all of that is making perfect sense to me. I guess if we had a correction system that actually did its job properly, people who go to jail would be going through university. That would be a radical idea. But I'm struck by the pragmatism of what you're saying. I was going to ask a slightly less pragmatic question about why there's a real or perceived idea out there, at least in your electorate and perhaps beyond, that our politics has slid into a much less kind place than it ever was when we remembered growing up. And are there easy steps to get us back to a kinder place? I mean, I know that you're outlining a lot of things that will take us there, but what's the simple breakdown of how do we get back to a kinder place in Australian politics where we can deal with these endemic wicked problems with compassion and not with punitive glee?
I think the best antidote is communities getting active and getting involved. democracy is not something you can take for granted. A good, well-functioning democracy is not something you need to take for granted. It is something that is all of our responsibilities to tend to and to support and to invest in. And we can do that in lots of different ways. I went last night to talk in a sort of a retirement village, effectively to 30 older people who invited me in just to talk about politics. And they asked me actually the same question. I said, it's by you people going, they may not agree with me, they may not have voted for me, but they do care about the country and they care about the outcomes. And it's actually by that care, by that engagement, that we will, I think, continue to protect our democracy. I think, that I think is probably fundamental. And I think it goes against the a countervailing force, which is of social media and the aspects which are dumbing down our politics and driving us into echo chambers, which I think is extremely difficult and something we need to fight against. And at the same time, I think there's a bunch of electoral reform that we need to do in terms of, to be honest, it's a crime that we don't have truth in political advertising as a standard in this country. And it's a crime we didn't have that before the referendum. And Zali Steggall's done absolutely great work on really driving that, and it is absolutely critical. It's also about looking at how, transparency in our electoral spending, transparency of donations, all those issues, how vested interests influence politics. Those are also areas that we absolutely need to address and fix, and make sure that we are constantly investing in the democracy. And so I think part of it's parliamentarian. It's a parliament's work, and which is always supported by the people. And part of it is actually just in all of our societies, get out there, get informed, have that obligation on people that they should be informed on issues, and then get active. It's up to all of us to get active.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Truth has suffered in this referendum campaign, and one of the highlights of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is truth-telling. And we've had a long period of government when the truth has been dispensed with for political expediency, and now there are so many misrepresentations of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. And what I sense amongst the public is a desire to punish Aboriginal people just for existing. So I'm terribly worried about not just the incarceration rates, which are indeed the highest recorded in the world in many parts of Australia and have been for decades since we started to keep records of our prison populations. I'm also very concerned about the 23,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care. And people legitimately ask, how will the Voice help these problems? So you're in the Parliament, you know how the Parliament works, you've gone through at least one cycle now of the parliamentary process, the budget. And do you think we've got a chance now, even if we do succeed at the referendum, in changing the conversation about Aboriginal people to deal with issues in a more, let's say, humane way, so that children are not removed from their families? How can the Parliament of Australia and executive government make a difference to these, existential threats to our community?
Before I go answer the question, my experience of the community is not that people wish Aboriginal people badly in general. There are people out there who do. Marcia, you and I have different experiences of this, and I appreciate you, will have, faced many people perhaps who do. That hasn't been my experience of the community here, but nor do a bunch of people necessarily consider hard enough about the challenges that we as a country must address. In some cases, it's more indifference, to be honest. But again, I appreciate, your experience gives you a different angle on this. That's my experience to date. The Voice could make an enormous difference to how we work in the Parliament, because there are questions that come up which have particular impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And frankly, But it always comes down to political lines. Like, the Labor Party says this, the coalition says this, and where's the truth in what actually people on the ground think? And that's why I think it would make the biggest difference as a member of Parliament to be able to talk to the Voice and understand from their perspective, what is the relative merits of the arguments being put forward. But do we have an opportunity, whether or not the Voice gets up or not? I think we have to. And I guess I think that has to be the responsibility of myself, of parliamentarians, of the country. We have responsibilities to all Australians, and it is up to us to, as you say, to make sure that we deal with people with the compassion and respect that we apply in our personal lives to each other must be applied at a political level on major issues as well.
So you think that the plea for reconciliation that comes from, some of our leaders now at this point in the referendum campaign is being heard, and that there's cause for optimism?
Optimism about the Voice, or optimism about our ability to reconcile as a country?
Well, I think, reconciliation, and, my personal view is that the Voice would be the most powerful reconciling action that we could take.
I agree with you, absolutely. And I agree with you that the Uluru Statement from the Heart, there are three parts of that, is the reconciliation that we need as a country. It's a very generous offer, and the Voice in itself is a modest request on that. So do I believe we can? I believe we can as a country. And I think we have to as well. And I think my generation, even I think of what I learned at school. When I went to school back in the sort of mainly 80s and early 90s, I didn't learn anything about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people or history there. I learned more about the Tudor kings and queens than I learned about Australia's own history. I know that has changed, and the different generations have different perspectives on this. And so I think that is probably our greatest hope, is as generationally we change and generationally we see things differently. And I think see things often more compassionately, that we have the greatest opportunity.
You're in a unique position sitting in the chamber as an MP, and this is a question that comes up quite a lot, but I think you're in a position to answer it in a somewhat unique way. It's often thought somewhat sceptically that if the Voice is voted up and gets passed, that it won't affect any real change. It will still be rather symbolic. As an MP, how does a voice that's voted into the Constitution help you perform your job better in hearing what Indigenous communities across Australia need?
I think it would be absolutely invaluable, and that's one of the reasons why I support it, because I think what it will do is allow me to get insight from a broad group of Aboriginal people across the country whose interests are no more than trying to support the broader Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community about what is their perspective on legislation in front of the House, but also in terms of policy development. What are the policies that are not coming up in front of us that should be there? And I think it's just critical. I mean, let's be honest, it's just not working now.
No.
There's a lot of goodwill out there, a lot of people who are well-intentioned, but it is not working. And I think this is the opportunity to actually start, by listening and learning and helping inform the Parliament who don't necessarily have a great deal of insight on a bunch of issues. And I use it myself as an example. I grew up in an area where there isn't a very big Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, where, I didn't have, friends growing up or a lot of insight. And there are a lot of people in Parliament who are like that. And so for them and for all of us, it's actually about learning so that we can make better policies and better decisions. And we had the cashless debit card, for example, up in Parliament. And I really wish we had the opportunity to have a conversation with the Voice around that and say, what was their perspective on that piece of legislation? Because it was all down party lines, but what was actually the broader communities, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders communities' perspective on that piece of legislation?
Well, no doubt the Northern Territory emergency response would have played out differently as well had there been a Voice.
I think that's right. And we had in Parliament, we had the Northern Territory or their land councils who came in and who said, we all support the voice, and it's exactly for that reason. You know, there's Australia as a broad country, you know, we're quite a diverse and disparate group of people, and Aboriginal people are only 4% of the population, 3 to 4% of the population. And so people don't necessarily have a great deal of insight into what is going to be of a policy that actually supports Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I think that's some of the challenge, and I think that's the opportunity.
So I have another question. The debate about the referendum has in some part gone down party lines, but also, you know, other elements have come into the debate. And I'm now very concerned about the narrative, the national narrative about Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. My view is that I think the more extreme views and falsehoods that have been claimed have really poisoned the waterhole, and it will take us years to recover from some of the more egregious falsehoods, such as, you know, Tony Abbott's Indigenous people get $30 billion a year. We all know that's simply not true. It's nothing like that. And in any case, the actual number, which is about $4 billion, is a government concoction that covers the costs of bureaucrats, distribution to the states, state bureaucratic costs. Very little of that money actually hits the ground. So we've seen the big lies and a whole new narrative take off. And I think it'll be many years before we can correct the ship, as it were. What's your view on that? Do you think I'm right or wrong?
There have been some very many damaging things said. I think that's right and had a lot of air. And so I think you're right to be concerned about that, and I think we should all be concerned about that. I guess I come back to my community where I feel it's more positive than that, but there's definitely, I think, a lot of mistruths and lies that are out there now, and have had more airtime. So I think I am concerned about that, and I think it's the painstaking work to build that back and to address those. And again, that's what we as volunteers, that's what we're trying to do in the community right now.
I think I'm concerned about our democracy and democratic process because having travelled to several other countries this year, there are places in the world where this debate couldn't even be had. It's just not possible because there is no democracy or popular sovereignty. There are no Indigenous people because they're not recognised, even if there are. You've touched on the importance of democracy before, but I mean, for me, I see this as a fundamental exercise in executing our democratic rights.
It is, and I think this is an opportunity to make the country better, and for all of us, that is the opportunity. I think it's sometimes lost on people that this isn't just about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This is about making the country better for all of us.
And, I think we three here talking to each other are agreed that the voice will be, as somebody said recently, an embellishment to our democracy. It will strengthen our democracy. And going back to your example of working in the hospital and changing the culture of the hospital so that management is better informed about the needs of patients and the staff, one of the things that I think most of us hope that the voice will be able to do is to make government more efficient and cut waste. So do you have a view on that?
That's absolutely right. And, again, that was part of what we were trying to do in the hospital days. We were actually trying to, spend money in public hospitals where it's going to make the greatest difference rather than spending money where it doesn't make a difference. And I think this is, there's a really significant argument for that, because you can improve, and that's what we did in our hospital. We improved patient outcomes, we improved patient experience, and we managed to run the hospital more efficiently. And that's what we should be trying to do always in public service. So, we have wasted billions of dollars, and frankly, but more importantly, we have wasted people's lives. And that's what I hate, is actually a waste of human potential. Drives me crazy. We want every Australian to thrive, to have, a good life as they see it and define it. And we are failing at that. And that's why we need to change.
I think it's worth reiterating for this episode, even though we have discussed it before, that the Closing the Gap program over its 2 iterations, Marcia, has been around since when? What year?
Well, it was introduced in 2007 as a response to, the scorched earth policies of that time.
Yeah, and we have never closed the gap. There have been a few, very small number of indicators that have risen, but unilaterally the gap has never been closed, and it looks like that scheme will never achieve its goals under the current approach or the past approach. And nothing we do actually works, does it? Let's be honest. So,
well, that's not quite true.
No?
There are some really fabulous, effective, successful programs that are designed by Indigenous people and implemented in Indigenous communities, but they kind of miss out on the funding and the policy inclusion because the bureaucrats are deeply suspicious of these initiatives. So take, for example, many youth programs in communities. You know that every Aboriginal community is worried about their youth. Our population is majority young. 60% or more are now under the age of 25. And, it's their potential that I think we're mostly concerned with, and we're hoping to enable them to reach their potential. But there are so many factors working against them, such as, lack of schools. There are many places in Australia that just don't have secondary schools, for instance. And so the community steps in and runs youth programs that try to keep children out of trouble. A great one that's supported in New South Wales is Just Reinvest. But it should be a national policy.
Yeah. So is that more the point? The point is that the schemes that do work aren't necessarily captured or focused within the Closing the Gap parameters. Is that more the point?
Well, closing the gap is one thing. That's a monitoring and measuring exercise. But if you look at the actual policies at the Commonwealth level, that's where, there's so much missing. The policies don't address the indicators, the targets, and they don't reflect what Indigenous people want in so many cases. Not always, but in far too many cases, and this is what makes the voice so necessary, I think. Have you had a look at Just Reinvest in New South Wales, Allegra?
Yeah, actually, I was at that event the other day with Jeffrey Winters, who was talking about exactly this, and he was talking about some great examples of in the Mount Druitt area. They worked out that there were sort of 60 kids a year going into incarceration for fines for basically use of public transport without paying for it, and saying, this was an opportunity of, rather than, incarcerating young people has no positive outcomes in terms of, life trajectory after that. And the opportunity of just saying, well, what would it take to actually stop that? And, it costs, the government worked out that it would save them $3.5 million a year if they just bought the kids Opal cards. So it's that sort of simplistic. I think that goes very much fundamentally to your question of saving money. You have to go to the source of understanding what's going on, why it's going on, and how do you actually make the difference, rather than making assumptions about what sort of program is going to make a difference.
Well, it also goes to your platform around kindness as well. That, rather than having a punitive approach when people do the wrong things, let's set them up to do the right things.
I think that's it, and particularly our young people, because every young person has made a mistake, and we were all young. We all made mistakes. We make mistakes when we're older too. I know my kids, as they grow up, they will make mistakes, and you just don't want them to be mistakes that completely change their lives for the worse. And that's what we have to try and do, is help kids, who may make mistakes, try and set them back on the right course so they can have actually a life that is about fulfilling their potential and a good life, rather than effectively sort of stymied from, some bad choices, a bad choice as a young person.
I was talking to a colleague the other day about the way that he was singled out as a young Indigenous man in his community, and those of us who work closely with Indigenous people know that this happens all the time. It's actually quite normalised, and it's normalised to the extent where everybody just seems to accept it's going to happen, which is a very sorry state of affairs. So it's great to hear about programs like these.
I'm really conscious that I don't know what it's like to have the stereotypes and some of the pieces that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to face in this country, and to fight twice as hard to show people what you can do, and to feel targeted in all those different ways.
I think, the ordinary Aboriginal person does feel targeted, especially, if they have darker skin colour and live in certain areas. And there's, I think, an enormous job to do with our criminal justice system, and particularly police, to ensure that they're not behaving in such a way that constitutes statistically targeting Aboriginal people. We saw this during the pandemic. Certain populations were targeted for fines for, breach of pandemic emergency laws. And it was mainly Aboriginal people and the populations in the western suburbs, much higher rate of fines than in the eastern suburbs.
Of Melbourne?
No, Sydney.
Oh, Sydney.
Yeah.
Sydney. Yeah.
And, something similar happened here in Melbourne. Say, for instance, with the plain and obvious breach of human rights in the rapid closure of the towers in Flemington and Kensington. Yes. So do you think politicians can have an influence in this? I think these are the questions. I'm asking the questions that I hear from people on the street, right? So, okay, so the voice, we don't know what it will look like. It will be designed by Parliament. I'd love to hear from you about that. But, what are the issues that get in the newspapers every day? I'm talking about one of them. Will the Commonwealth Parliament have the capacity to influence the state governments? Because that's where most of the responsibility lies.
There are many pieces in health and education that are joint responsibilities across Commonwealth and states. And certainly, Commonwealth does also a lot of funding of a lot of things, and then also has responsibility for things like social services, full responsibility, which have profound impact on people's lives. So I think those are some of the areas where I think that the voice will have an impact, both in terms of the areas that the Commonwealth controls directly, but in those areas where it works with the states on priorities such as health and education.
Yeah. So today I'm receiving messages about what a good job Noel Pearson is doing in raising rheumatic heart fever, which is rampant in Aboriginal communities, but which was eradicated in the rest of the population in the 1950s. And, many of us in the health sector believe that rheumatic heart fever is one of those diseases that needs to be treated according to something like an epidemic plan. It needs to be treated with the highest priority and with great coordination, much more effective coordination in order to eliminate it. And we need a goal of eliminating rheumatic heart fever. And that's just one of the diseases. Of course, most people don't know that we're seeing a rise in tuberculosis and leprosy in remote areas now. So again, we need these coordinated, epidemic-style responses to the diseases in the Indigenous community. So you raise the issue of health. I don't know. I mean, we've been raising rheumatic heart fever for a very long time. Why is it that the Parliament just doesn't prioritise these issues?
I think it's, with issues that affect small parts of our population, they're harder to get the traction on. And I think that is part of the role of the voice. There are issues that, you get visibility, issues get visibility in terms of how, if the more people it affects or the more deeply it affects people. But I think I think it's a perfect example of, understanding, what will make a difference to the community and how do you actually get the focus on that.
Look, I think that's right. And I think what the voice will be able to do is to put these issues into the parliamentary environment where they can be discussed at the, policy level, and hopefully lead to effective government responses. So we've covered quite a lot of issues. My hope is that the independents like yourself will be able to play a role.
Yeah.
Should we be successful at the referendum, or even afterwards, if we're not successful in assisting Aboriginal peoples to be heard and to have their issues addressed effectively in the Parliament?
I think that's exactly right. I think we have to, whatever the outcome, we have to find ways to do this better.
Yeah, thank you, Allegra.
So, Allegra, you've been wonderfully generous with your time and thoughts today, and we're very grateful for that. For people who are listening and are genuinely undecided about how they're going to vote on the 14th of October, what would you say to them?
I was inspired by actually a religious leader who I heard speak the other day, who I think was from the Anglican Church, who was urging parishioners to give generous consideration to the voice. And I liked that expression because it's actually, the Uluru Statement from the heart is a generous offer. And I think it is actually looking for a generous consideration rather than saying, well, what are the reasons to vote no? But rather than saying, well, actually, what are the reasons in this case to vote yes? And because I think it's appropriate to approach it like that, because this is a request that has been made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I think, as people who are invested, our whole country is invested in moving forward effectively together as one country, then we need to listen to the people who are part of this country when they make a request of us with generous considerations and with open hearts. So I urge people to start with yes, and then consider, is there any fundamental reason why you should say no? And I think if you start with yes, if you start with this idea of, well, I've been asked something by the Aboriginal people of this nation because they have said this will make a difference to their lives. We should start with the assumption that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people know what will make the biggest difference to their lives. They've asked us to support this, and we need to have a very good reason to vote against that. And, when I look at the reasons to vote against that, I just can't see one that stacks up, because this is going to be safe. It is not going to have a significant impact on my life, but it has the opportunity to change the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And finally, in the words of an Aboriginal man in my community, a guy called Gene Ross, who says we've got 65,000 years of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history. We have almost 250 years of European and multicultural history. These are not things that are competing with each other. This is 65,000 years plus 250 years. This is the opportunity for us to take a step forward together with those two histories entwined and into a new phase of this country. And I think that is very inspiring.
Thank you, Allegra. What a wonderful note to finish on.
Thanks so much, both of you.